Mason. And I'm back. And today I'm going to be talking about the overestimation of Ron DeSantis. And obviously, Ron DeSantis has just announced his run for the 2024 presidential nomination for the Republican Party, as well as his candidacy for president overall. And obviously, Ron DeSantis has some strengths, but he's very unlikely to win the 2024 presidential primary against Donald Trump. But today we're just going to be talking about his presidential primary problems as well as his general election problems. And a lot of people, especially on the internet, really overestimate Ron DeSantis as a candidate and, just his candidacy in general without talking about a lot of key issues he has. So, against someone like Donald Trump in the Republican primary, Donald Trump has a very supportive following. And as of now, the polls have Donald Trump at like 55% of the Republican Party's vote, which I think is not accurate because Donald Trump is someone that's been underestimated in almost every poll. So if Donald Trump is at 55%, he's probably at 70 or 75%. I'm just being realistic because when I talk to, Republicans, in the military or in general, often the times the ones that are more politically aware, they are not supportive of Donald Trump in terms of like in general, but most Republicans they're going to vote for Donald Trump. There's just that's just what's going to happen, and a lot of people overestimate like how much it would take to convince these voters to not vote for Donald Trump against someone else. It's just something that you just haven't seen. Donald Trump got more votes than any Republican candidate in history, and Donald Trump was the only president. He won the most amount of electoral votes for any Republican candidate since 1988. So what I'm saying is Donald Trump has a specific brand in the Republican Party that Republicans just necessarily can't necessarily get away from. And Ron DeSantis is someone that's tried to necessarily mock that brand, but mocking and being it are two very different things. So when looking at that, I don't realistically think Ron DeSantis has maybe even a 5 to 10% chance of defeating Donald Trump in a presidential primary. It doesn't matter what Donald Trump does or what he runs into. Ron DeSantis just is not going to be able to do that. And Ron DeSantis lacks the charisma. He lacks the ability to draw out these specific kinds of voters that Donald Trump was able to bring to the forefront. And I want to talk about Ron DeSantis in a general election. So let's say Ron DeSantis does find a way to defeat Donald Trump and make it to the 2024 general election. What kind of problems would he have? So this is the map of all the safe states for Democrats and Republicans. And some of these states will be likely, but I just categorize them as being safe because they're not realistically in reach. I do think that Ron DeSantis would win Iowa and Ohio by pretty solid margins. I think he'd do worse than Donald Trump here. Because one of the biggest problems that Ron DeSantis has is he lacks the charisma and the ability to connect with a lot of these white rural and working class voters that Donald Trump was able to. And Donald Trump was able to bring Iowa and Ohio, as well as Maine's second district, into the Republican column because he was just able to drive these white rural voters and these white working class voters out to the polls. That a lot of them that had never voted before. And Ron DeSantis just doesn't have the ability to do that. Very similar to what you saw with J.D. Vance in Ohio. Yeah, he might be saying a lot of the similar things that Donald Trump is saying, but he just does not have the specific ability to connect them the same way Donald Trump does. And for states, I don't think Ron DeSantis has any chance of really flipping. We have Maine second, Minnesota, Nebraska second district, Colorado, New Mexico, and Virginia, as well as New Hampshire. Um, I think New Hampshire and Minnesota would be the closest. They are the closest, obviously, but Colorado, New Mexico, and Virginia. Colorado's a state Joe Biden won by 13 and a half, going on 14 points, and Democrats did better with a moderate Republican candidate. New Mexico is a state where Democrats have just been it's probably about a D plus 12, D plus 11 state, and higher turnout from Hispanic Latino voters is something that just shifts the state leftward. And in Virginia, you did see Glenn Youngkin win Virginia, but even with Glenn Youngkin's victory, the DC suburbs still weren't able to shift as far right as even Donald Trump was able to get the same. Donald Trump did better in the DC suburbs than Glenn Youngkin did in the DC suburbs in 2016. So even with Glenn Youngkin's slight overperformance, he was able to bring it back to what it was in 2016. And you have to also take into consideration that black turnout in Virginia was abysmal. So That's not really a fair representation. And Ron DeSantis is not necessarily comparative to Glenn Youngkin, in my opinion, in terms of being trying to be non-controversial. Ron DeSantis has alienated a lot of these white, college-educated, and suburban voters by his abortion bills, by his attack with Disney things, and his attack against the LGBT community, most notably the "Don't Say Gay" bill. That's alienated, which caused his problems with Disney in the first place. It's turned a lot of suburban voters and college-educated voters against Ron DeSantis. And that's going to be a problem for him across the country in any presidential election. Obviously, his home state of Florida is a state that he should be feeling very confident in, as well as Texas. I don't realistically see him losing Texas, any Republican losing Texas. And I do think that, for example, I think Donald Trump would lose Denton and Collin County. I think that Ron DeSantis would probably lose Collin County, but I think he'll maybe narrowly hone on in Denton, but I could be wrong. Like, I don't think Ron DeSantis would do as bad in the suburbs as Donald Trump. I think the suburbs will still shift against him, but I still think he's going to do bad. And the problem with Ron DeSantis is he's not going to be able to get as many white rural voters, not as many white working class voters out to the polls. And something that you saw with Adam Laxalt and with Ted Budd in North Carolina, a lot of these non-controversial Republicans, they still did poorly with suburban voters because the suburbs are shifting against all Republican candidates. It's not necessarily a good candidate, a Trump candidate. It doesn't matter. The suburbs are becoming more diverse. They're becoming more educated, and because of that, that's shifting these places against Republicans. It has nothing to do with Trump himself. Trump is expediting that because Trump is someone that drives voters that don't like him to the polls. But Ron DeSantis is doing the same thing. When you're attacking, when you're citing an abortion bill, which is something that we know that female voters don't support, which are the majority of the American electorate, you're automatically attacking those voters. When you're doing things that many black people don't support, you're automatically driving black voters to the polls. When you're doing things that the LGBT community doesn't approve of, you're driving an increasing American electorate to the polls, and that has a negative impact on any Republican electorally. Because if you go back to 2016, this was the last time Republicans were able to win uh, any kind of federal elections nationwide, and if you look at that, Donald Trump was able to win Wisconsin narrowly. He's able to win Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania by tilt margins. And if you look at these suburban counties, like Hillary Clinton outperformed Barack Obama in the suburbs. She did better than him in the suburbs. Like the wild counties shifted in her favor. She did better in Oakland County. She did better in Kent County than him. She did better in Philadelphia suburban counties. And she even did better than Pittsburgh. But the reason why she was able to lose is because Donald Trump made some huge gains amongst the white working class and white rural voters. And you saw black turnout in these big cities decrease, and that allowed Donald Trump to have narrow victories against Hillary Clinton in the 2016 presidential election. And the problem for Ron DeSantis is automatically he doesn't have the ability to drive out white rural and white working class turnout the same way that Donald Trump was able to. And you've seen candidates, regardless. We're talking about Ron Johnson, who's an incumbent. He's still struggled in the wild counties. So when looking at that, Ron DeSantis is still going to struggle in these suburban counties in the Rust Belt. And the fact that he's banned certain Black History programs, he's the banned inclusion and diversity. He's had the NAACP come out against him, which is the worst thing that any Republican can do is try to be at war with the NAACP. He's given black voters a reason to vote, and that's something that's a problem for any Republican candidate because they depend on turnout being low amongst that demographic. And a lot of people point to Ron DeSantis being able to improve amongst Hispanic Latino voters, but Hispanic Latino voters in Florida are mainly Cuban voters, and that's not representative of Hispanic Latino voters nationwide because most Hispanic Latino voters in the country are Mexican Americans. And there's not a large Mexican American present in Florida. So you can't compare that to Texas or Arizona or Nevada. And even with Nevada and Arizona, that's not enough to win a presidential election. But regardless, that doesn't necessarily help you on a national scale. So when looking at that, Ron DeSantis, he's probably going to lose Nevada. I think Nevada and Arizona are states that Republicans just really have their bad luck against them in terms of trying to overcome higher Hispanic Latino turnout with a states that's becoming rapidly more Hispanic and a lot rapidly more educated in Arizona's case. It's just going to make the state significantly harder to win, and that's something that Adam Laxalt had to find out. That's something that Martha McSally, uh, Blake Masters and Kerry Lake both found out the hard way, and Donald Trump found out in 2020. So for Nevada and Arizona, Ron DeSantis, he's still going to struggle with these suburban voters. He's going to struggle with Hispanic Latino voters in both of the states. And that's just going to give Democrats a pretty sizable advantage in 2024 against any Republican. And in the Rust Belt, Ron DeSantis is considerably weaker than Donald Trump because not only is he going to struggle with suburban voters, not only is he going to motivate a lot of black voters to come out against him, he's not going to get the same amount of white rural turnout and white working class turnout that that Donald Trump would get, which automatically puts Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania up in the air. And Wisconsin being the most competitive, but realistically, even Ron Johnson struggled in the wild counties. Like Ron DeSantis is not going to do well in the wild counties or do well in the suburban regions. He's going to do worse in the driftless region of Wisconsin, and you're going to see a lot of black turnout in Milwaukee. And a lot of these um, younger voters in Madison, they have a big problem with anti-abortion, anti-LGBTQ rhetoric, which is something that Daniel Kelly had to find out. It would really hurt Ron DeSantis in a state on a head-on one-to-one matchup with Joe Biden in 2024. And a big problem for Ron DeSantis is when you've spent your year making things about being anti-woke, woke this, woke that. Woke is, I don't know if many people know this, but woke is a word that was used in the black community to like reference racism and being aware of racism. And when you take a word like that and use it to target black people, and even if he's not targeting them in general, I'm talking about how it's perceived. You saw a record breaking turnout from black voters against Donald Trump because most of them think Donald Trump's a white supremacist. So for Ron DeSantis to do something like that is delusional, especially when Republicans are already losing Georgia. They're only holding on to North Carolina because turnout amongst black voters is low. And they're losing the Rust Belt because these black voters in big cities are coming out. So when you're targeting a demographic that stops Republicans from winning federally, and Republicans are only able to win a lot of these races because turnout is low amongst their demographic. It's like you're shooting yourself in the foot. Like Republicans have to find a way to be less controversial, to minimize Democratic turnout while still being able to cater to their base. And that's something that Ron DeSantis can't do. It's like he's trying to be Trump, but he's at the same time attacking more voters than Trump is. And that's a problem because Donald Trump at least has the white rural voters and the white working class voters. And Ron DeSantis doesn't really have a demographic that he knows is going to come out big for him. And I think that the white rural working class voters are going to come out big for Ron DeSantis, but not as big. And we saw that technically white rural voters came out big for Blake Masters. They came out big for Dr. Oz, but they didn't come out big enough. And that's something that Ron DeSantis is going to struggle with because it doesn't necessarily matter if you're Republican or not. It matters your rhetoric. And what people don't understand is Trumpism is less popular than Trump. Trump always outperforms Trumpist candidates. And with Ron DeSantis trying to echo Trump, trying to be more like Trump, he's motivating the same voters to come out while not being able to do as well with Trump's base, which is why I think he's actually a weaker electoral candidate than Donald Trump. And I know that's a very controversial opinion, but I think I have a pretty sizable group of evidence to back that up. So again, I'm Military Election Predictions, and I'm Langston, and that's my perception of Ron DeSantis' 2024 presidential campaign. Obviously, I know a lot of people might disagree with that, but I think it's a pretty valid point. So again, my next video will be about the underestimation of Kamala Harris and her potential presidential prospects. So make sure to tune into that. Thank you guys so much for tuning into my channel, and have a great day, you guys.